All right. This is the 11th edition of the Saturday Smackdown series. Um, Usually I don't do movie reviews because I'm not a reviewer, but I decided for the sake of talking about something I found interesting, I would. Be warned that there will be spoilers. I'm going to keep saying that as I speak because people like to, click on things and then be, angry and upset even when you warn them not to click on something. But before I even begin with the spoilers, let me talk about the road to getting here. So, um, I have been a fan of Spider-Man since I was a little kid. Uh, in fact, I have said before and mentioned a couple of streams in the past that Spider-Man 2 was the earliest movie I remember going to see in the theaters when my father took me to see it. We also went to see the third one, and then it was 2 years later in January of 2010 where Sony announced that Spider-Man 4 was canceled. Then the first TASM came out 2 years later, and I thought it was all right. The issues I had with it were stuff that I've explained before. I didn't like the costume. Thought Lizard looked terrible. Had the worst motivation of any villain of any of those four movies that had been released at the time. I'm going to turn the whole city into lizards. So, I still thought it was an okay, first chapter to I guess a reset or reboot, whichever term you want to use to describe it. TASM 2 was the first one I didn't see in theaters because every single person around me told me that it was trash. And when I got around to eventually seeing it, I was I had to agree with them. I did not enjoy it. I thought it had too much stuff in it, and it was just trying to do a lot of things while also not giving enough of the interesting ideas that it had time to marinate. Um, Homecoming, I didn't see in theaters. Same thing with Far From Home. So this is the first one I've seen in theaters in 10 years. Um, and also after I left the theater on Thursday, I was it was raining outside, and about while trying to get this Uber, there was like this storm of water. I guess not thunderstorm, but it was raining pretty heavily. So I was trying to get somewhere to stand in front of so my driver could get me because when you don't give them an address, and if you do give them an address, but you're not in front of where they park, and they'll sit there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then they'll drive off and leave you, and then there goes whatever amount you spent to leave, being taken with for a ride instead of you. So I ended up having to walk, I think 20 or 30 minutes to stand in front of somebody's house, and then I get a driver, right? Someone to pick me up, and then like 5, 6 minutes after that, they announce that they've canceled, and the next driver takes like 30 minutes to get me. So I'm just standing in the rain for an hour. It was really unpleasant, but it didn't affect my enjoyment of the movie. It was just one of those things where it's always those circumstances that are always I guess they're not prevalent with just going to see it that mess it up a little bit, kind of annoying. um I guess the best way to do a review of this is to kind of just start by talking about the things I thought that were good. uh a lot of people when I was a kid would trash Spider-Man 3 because they would say, oh, it had too many plot lines, too many villains, right? Three is too many. And I was in the lead up to this, I was laughing and I was saying, so three villains is too many, but five isn't because that's the number they have in this. While I would say the film doesn't have as many plot lines, it certainly has way more characters. Um, and also, I should clarify that out of the five villains, the only two who really get what I would consider development and some kind of specific attention, like not just being reduced to a couple of lines and some gags or whatever, some power highlights, are Doc Ock and Green Goblin, who are considered by a lot of people to be two of the best, are the two best antagonists in any of these movies. Uh, just to give you an example, Sandman's introduced in this. He's got this thing where he can't go back to his non-sand form, like his powers are messing with him. And I swear throughout the whole movie, he might have maybe 5, 6, 7 lines. So that's my point, that he's in the film for a pretty good chunk of it. We get to see him use his powers a few times. but like actual character development, like a specific spotlight on him. Mm-mm. Um, Lizard's the same issue where like we don't even get to see him get captured. He's just been captured off screen. Uh, Electro's kind of an interesting case because he does affect the plot more than the other two. As in, when he blows up the apartment, that sets up the conclusion or the third act of the movie, or second act, latter half, whatever. So he does have some more plot significance than the other two, but it's still not nearly enough as much with Doc Ock and Green Goblin. And I said before that I would see this regardless of if Maguire and Garfield were in it because I was a really big fan of Molina's performance as Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2. And he's been confirmed for this film since December of last year. They were very open about that. We only found out after a couple of months that this is supposed to be the same iteration of the character from Spider-Man 2, which did worry some people. They were saying that they were thinking that they would have him renege and become a villain again. And while that is technically what they do, the fact that he's acknowledged after he gets the I guess the chip that cures him by Peter to be this decent person who's corrupted by his arms, I thought was a pretty respectful nod to the original second Raimi film. So, it's kind of give or take. I'm very content for the most part with the handling of the antagonist in this. I think it shouldn't have been five because, like I said, I for years saw people say Spider-Man 3 has too many villains because there are three of them. But you don't see that being written in reviews of this. And trust me, this movie has way more characters who are just as underdeveloped or even more so than any of the criticisms levied at Spider-Man 3. Not even just counting the villains. We can get into some other ones later, but the two that they definitely did the most work with and actually cared the most about, having like a role in this were Doc Ock and Goblin. The only issue I have with Doc Ock, and I say this not as someone who wants to nitpick the film. I enjoyed his role. I thought it was good. He's the first one we see out of any of the villains when he encounters Peter on the freeway. Is that after the apartment blows up and he like falls out of it, I swear there's like 5, 6 scenes from that point on where there may be 10 or 15 minutes where he just disappears from the movie. Like he apparently has turned a new leaf, and we know that he has because of his actions later on in the movie that are very supportive of the of Spider-Man. Uh After he gets shot at the apartment, he just vanishes for like a whole 15 segment of the film and like no explanation on where he went, what he's doing. And that's another one of the reasons why I think when you have a film like this, it would have been better to just have maybe 3 or 4, basically just trim down the number as much as possible because when you have something interesting you can do with the particular character because you don't have enough time, you'll even go out of your way to not explain something as simple as where did this person go for the last day or so. All they had to do was just have a throwaway line that he was looking for the villains who had all escaped from the apartment. Nothing. He just shows up again. No any type of reasoning for why he vanished along with the rest of the antagonists after being cured. But yeah, I would say those two are the best handled out of any of the antagonists in the film. Let me read what Akatsuki Merchant said before we go further. If spoilers ruin the movie, it's because the movie is bad. So spoil away. Well, look, I'm just gonna outright say it. I enjoyed it. I'm just explaining what I liked and didn't like, and I would say that the villains that I actually like were handled pretty decent. I'm about to get into Green Goblin in a second. Also, I want to explain that Tina's comment, no Megumi, no James X James, no stream attended, is a reference to another stream I did probably whenever the last trailer came out, maybe it was a month ago, where someone in the comment section wrote, no Toby, no Andrew, no tickets bought. And I just thought it was the funniest thing. Like they're making this declaration that if these two actors aren't in this film, they won't go to see it, which I thought was very hilarious. Like you're so stuck on these two that if they even think to do a movie where they bring back their villains but not them. It's so inconceivable to you, whatever. Um, I thought that was hilarious. So getting over to Green Goblin, it's kind of funny because I watched the original film. Well, I watched it like 3 or 4 times this year already, but I watched it again on Thursday in preparation to go see this. Um, Defoe really again, him and Molina out of the villains get the most to do, and he really shines. And there was this expectation that a lot of us had that since he's considered a Raimi antagonist, he would have some big rematch with the Raimi version of Spider-Man, and instead he pretty much cements himself as the most significant antagonist for the MCU's version of Spider-Man by offing his aunt. Uh, and a lot of his dialogue I find to be completely in tune with the way he acted in 2002 Spider-Man. Just where he tells Peter, no good deed goes unpunished. You can thank me later as he throws the pumpkin bomb. Um, I think the only issue I have with him maybe is that he also disappears for a solid 15 or 20 minutes with no explanation of where he is. And that's something I always liked about the first spot and why the Raimi trilogy is still the part of this series that, is the gold standard for me that I like the most. Because during the original Spider-Man, when you didn't see him out terrorizing people, you got scenes of the internal conflict, like him talking to himself. And in this, once we see the Green Goblin identity after he goes to the apartment and it's like revealed that that identity's taken over and it sets off Peter's sense, we don't get to see Norman at all ever again for the rest of the movie until he's cured at the end of it. And I just think it would have made for a more compelling and in my opinion, more stuff for Defoe to do if they had more scenes of him, at conflict with himself, because Green Goblin, at least the Norman Osborn version, and the Harry one also, but the original interpretation for the version of Green Goblin is written by Stan Lee was that Norman Osborn is a good man, decent man, whatever, and this is something that gets retconned later on where other writers try to make him just a complete villain from the get-go. But the Green Goblin identity is this sick, twisted version of himself that is homicidal, right, and wants to go after those that have wronged him. And they actually depict him as being even more, I'd say, evil than he was in the 2002 film, where pretty much everyone that he went after did something to those that he cared about. So, for example, when he kills the board members after they throw him off the board, when he tries to go after Aunt May and Mary Jane to get back at Peter, it's this version of him is I would say still in tune with the version we saw in the first Raimi film, but definitely just kind of going more into the territory of generic villainy, because that was something I found. I always find it more interesting when there's a villain who has like a specific pattern to what they do, because it humanizes them, which is one of the reasons I really liked that film's version of the character. So just having him go around blowing up buildings and all the rest of that is just kind of whatever to me. And while I do like the armored look from the original film, I was kind of glad they got rid of it because Defoe's like way of contort, and I'm not saying this to insult him at all. The way he contorts his face, just perfectly nails that like multi-personality thing where he like looks very innocent and kind of docile, and then starts acting that like that. I think it's a lot more scarier because when he's just has the mask on, you don't get to see his face, and when you have such a good actor who can do a lot of like non-verbal communication of their transformation and personality, it's a lot less limiting, in terms of their range. I absolutely love the way Defoe plays Green Goblin. He's not afraid to terrorize the hero, and he's absolutely ruthless. Right, and I'm saying that one of the highlights of the movie was him being in it. They did a lot more with him than I thought they would do. Because remember, when this was announced, we only knew about Doc Ock and Electro, and I thought it was just going to be MCU Spider-Man fights, a new iteration of those two characters played by actors from previous films, and that would be it. But instead we got this really great performance from Defoe as well. So he's definitely out of anyone in this movie, him Melina, and then maybe I don't want to talk about the three Spider-Men yet. We'll get into that later. But those two are definitely the like reason I would go back and watch this. It feels like a complete continuation of what we saw from them in the original Raimi films. Um, just with like a new twist, like some new thing for them to do. And it feels completely respectful to what we saw before. So I really like his performance. I think he alone is enough to see because even though he was in two and three, it was just as hallucinations. So this being like his first major role as Green Goblin in almost 20 years, I think is worth seeing it by itself. They do a really good job with him. I was shocked. What else do I want to get into? There's a lot of stuff to discuss. I just have to think of the sequence of events. I guess we could discuss some of the supporting characters. I like that they gave J.K. Simmons more to do in this than in Far From Home, where he just has the cameo. Like you actually get to see him try to play a somewhat active role in the plot when he's getting calls from for his news show, and like traveling over to the apartment. That's another thing that's been improved because I said before the biggest issue I had with TASM as a series, not the first one, but just as a series, those two movies by themselves. The biggest issue I've had with the MCU version of Spider-Man as well is the lack of the Jameson character. Jameson in the comics and you can go on the Marvel Wiki and look this up, is the single most recurring character in all of the Spider-Man mythos outside of Aunt May and maybe Mary Jane. There's no reason he should that like if we could reverse time, I would have Simmons in all of these. Or if you don't want to have him play, and which he's the most universally liked actor in this entire franchise, in all of these different iterations of the character, which is why he got to come back. I think there's something wrong with not having him there because one of the things that makes the character of Spider-Man sympathetic and relatable is having this person who, no matter what you do, tears you down and like tries to ruin your reputation and just will never give you a break. And without Jameson, the character just doesn't have this like human antagonism. Like it's so like he grounds him so much in reality because a lot of people have someone in their life or someone that they know of who, no matter what they do, doesn't like them. No matter what they do, they can't please. That's what Jameson is to Spider-Man. So I was really happy that they actually gave Simmons multiple scenes in this. That was another highlight of it, if you will. And I really hope that at some point we get the MCU's version of Scorpion to become a main villain of a movie, so we can get that story adapted because that'll mean another big role for Simmons. If they actually follow the comic story and don't twist it or anything. Okay, Jameson is the most important character in Spider-Man comics, so I don't know why they didn't include him in the MCU. Yeah, but that's the same issue I had with TASM, where they acknowledge in two that the character exists. They just don't get Simmons to play him or anything to do in the story. I thought that was a really dumb, and again, that's why I like the Raimi trilogy the most. You actually get to see the Daily Bugle, but since every version of this character wants to keep keeping him in high school forever, it's become very impossible to, I guess, see those core aspects. And it's so weird too because he started working for the Daily Bugle in the comics when he was in high school, and they just they just like gloss over like whatever. All right, let's talk about some of the supporting characters before we get into the big three. Um, I still think that Ned is very underdeveloped. Like I couldn't tell you anything about his personality other than he's Peter's friend that is smart. That's just which is really frustrating because he's supposed to be part of like the core trio, and I just feel like he's a tag along who doesn't get any kind of actual like. And it's weird because he's now been in three movies, technically five if you count Infinity War and Endgame, but they're cameos. And I still really could not say that I feel like I know this character, and it's just so like I just wish we could get Harry already. I'm really tired of having a character who's only interesting because people think he'll become Hobgoblin. Like that's that's the only gimmick to people. It's gonna be like, oh, I wonder what he's gonna do in the next one. There was all this crap about, oh, his actor lost a lot of weight. maybe he's getting ready to suit up and be Hobgoblin, and then no, none of that comes out to pass. Um, MJ was all right. I still one of my issues with Far From Home is the fact that we never find out how Peter became attracted to her, when he became attracted to her. I mentioned before that in between, like the start of Far From Home, he just likes her. There's nothing set up from that in the previous movie, and it's not even if they wanted to, whatever. I've mentioned that before. It's an okay romance, but I just think it was really ridiculous that they couldn't have it develop during the last movie. Just he likes her now. I thought that was dumb. I really think a lot of it was just due to the fact that they believe they can't do a superhero movie without there being a love interest. There's some kind of mandate that you must have a love interest in every superhero movie. So he has to like this girl that he had no attraction to in their first appearance or in the first one. Um, who else is there? Happy was funny. He's barely in it though. That's another reason. The stuff with Flash was also kind of interesting, like the fact that he wrote this book really, really quickly after Peter's identity came out. Um, but he's got the same problem that a lot of these other supporting characters do, which is just no screen time. They're just there to like eventually, maybe someday, get more than 5 or 6 lines and 3 minutes of being on screen in one of these. Um, it's kind of funny because as much as I talk about the Raimi trilogy, I'd say the only thing TASM has that I really, really like over the other versions is the best Flash. Like I really like Flash in the first TASM, and that's why it really sucks that for the second one, he's only in a deleted scene. Because I've said before, Flash is one of the most developed supporting characters of any superhero. This high school bully who idolizes the person they bully in their superhero guise, that goes overseas and then like slowly and gradually becomes the best friend of the person they used to torment. Like I still remember the one issue where Peter's talking about how he misses Flash and how Harry's all right, but he's no like I guess if you read a lot of those comics and you just see how it develops, it's really like a lot of people say comics don't change and things stay the same, but Flash did not. So that was something I really appreciated, and I really hope that the MCU better utilizes the character as they progress with their, you know, second trilogy of this stuff. But I'm not going to hold my breath. um, I guess now we can talk about Aunt May, and I can piss people off. So my favorite version of Aunt May is Rosemary Harris from the Raimi trilogy. I think Sally Field is a good actress from TASM, but whatever, she's just okay to me. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of the MCU's version of Aunt May because she just doesn't seem to have anything in common with other versions of the character outside of a love for Peter. And one of the issues I had with Far From Home, right, is that it does this thing I hate about, which is called off-screen development. So at the end of Homecoming, she finds out that he's Spider-Man by seeing him in his costume after he comes back, and I'm like, oh my god, this is so cool! I can't wait, because in this series, right, you've had Aunt May in all of these Sony-produced Spider-Man movies, but you've never had one who we knew about his identity. So I was like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. They're gonna have a whole movie where she has to like wrestle with being the mother of Spider-Man. Do I want him to go out and save people, or am I going to give in to my own selfishness and, advise him against doing this? And instead of doing that, they just, do a time skip, and she's okay with it. So we don't get to see what the process was for her, and just nothing. And sure enough, after having a somewhat decent role in Homecoming, she has almost nothing to do in Far From Home. Which is really frustrating because this is, I guess now in retrospect, it's even worse knowing what happens to her in this, where she's like okay role in Homecoming, tiny role in Far From Home, and then you're in the first half of this before you get stuffed in the fridge. I guess I could say it was kind of surprising, although I still think it would have been way more shocking if it was MJ that ended up being the one that gets fridge stuffed. But it doesn't work for me as something I would actually care about because I've never really given a hoot about the MCU's version of Aunt May. She just is this, I guess, attempt at sex appeal with a character who is, that's not. I don't believe that's supposed to be their role. I think she's supposed to be the maternal figure to Peter that gives him like this older person to take advice from and listen to, and we don't really get that. We just get some jokes about, "Oh my God, your aunt is hot," and just not really any development. And the few times they could have done something interesting with her, they walked away from it. I'm sorry, but I don't really think Zendaya is good for the MJ role. I don't like MJ being portrayed as this edgy goth girl. Well, you know what they say, Akatsuki Merchant, that it's supposed to be a new iteration of the character, or it's supposed to not be Mary Jane specifically, or just have like a homage name, or whatever thing they like to say. I don't really like this iteration of the character that much either. Um, but I'm just kind of, I'll let them have whatever their little thing that they want, because I do think the chemistry between her and Holland is good. I just think that she's a very underdeveloped character who they could have used Far From Home to actually do stuff with, as far as like explaining her motivations and all the rest of that. And I don't think they did that enough. Nah, Far From Home would need a whole rewrite for this to be like, oh, this is the Home trilogy. It's like, well, this is a pretty bizarre trilogy. Like, you have Lizard in the first movie as a post-credit scene cameo, and then he still hasn't turned into, not Lizard, Scorpion, and then he still hasn't turned to Scorpion after two movies. So just stuff like that is weird to me. But to each his own. Not even gonna sit there and get caught up on stuff like that. You can tell that a lot of the ideas they just change like at the drop of a hat. Because I remember one time, John Watts said that he wanted Craven to be the villain for the third movie in the trilogy, and there's not a there's no Craven to be seen here. It's also kind of funny because they were telling us over and over that they wanted, who's the other one? There was something else that happened. I'm trying to remember what it was. Like some other idea that they were interested in using. I don't remember fully. Yeah, I would have preferred if they just did Mary Jane again, but I don't know why they won't. That's why I said I've never just been that big a fan of the MCU version of the character, because a lot of the things I like about him they don't do. They don't have a Daily Bugle. They don't have Harry. They don't have actual Mary Jane. They don't have Gwen. They don't, like, just nothing. Just a couple of the villains they use, right? But they tie him to Iron Man, and then like I've never and it's almost like they know that their version of the character is so much different from what we've seen before that they're encouraging you to check out the previous movies, right? Like they're more accurate. All right, let's talk about the big three. So Holland did a better performance, churned in a better performance in this than either of the other two. Um, Particular highlights for me are the scenes where he's mourning his aunt's death, right? And then the scene where toward the end he goes to see MJ and Ned after they have their memories erased of his secret identity. Those are probably the two best scenes for me from him. You had some people who were saying that, oh man, his fight against Green Goblin was so brutal, and it was the most brutal fight we've seen any of these since the first Spider-Man, even more brutal. I'm like, not really. I mean, the first film is so that last fight is just this bare knuckles brawl, and like there's almost no powers involved. You get one pumpkin bomb, you get the webs being, ineffective until the end. Um, I just thought this was kind of a cheap imitation. I didn't think that he earned it. I didn't, because I guess when you look at these two movies, the first Spider-Man and this one, and you have to compare them, at least for me anyway, because it's Defoe is Green Goblin in both. The reason that final fight between the Goblin and Peter the Raimi version of this was so much better to me is because we saw the two of them conflict with each other multiple times, right? We saw them together in their non-superhero and supervillain identities multiple times. There was just so much built, and that was one of the reasons why I said that movie works so much more better as far as its story for me personally, because it doesn't have as many characters and it can actually give time to this like one specific relationship. The most important dynamic of that film is Peter Parker versus Norman Osborn. You know, they're similar to each other in the fact that they're both like very intelligent, get their powers around the same time. One chooses the path of the hero, the other chooses the path of the villain. They fight each other at least two times before the actual final battle. With this film's iteration of Green Goblin, even though it's supposed to be the same one, it doesn't work as much for me because they have one fight, him and Holland, and then he just kind of disappears. He does this thing that's very important for Holland's character, which is killing his aunt, but he just disappears from the movie up until the bridge scene. You know, the scene not where they're like fighting all the villains. So it doesn't have the same emotional resonance, even just as a movie by itself, because it doesn't have enough time devoted to it as the other film did. That's one of the joys of having only one villain in the movie. You actually get to kind of make them a very, very important part of the story. Like I would say Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2 has more development than probably any member of the MCU supporting cast, barring pretty much nobody. Like outside of Peter, this the MCU's versus this character, no one else really gets any kind of development or characterization, I would say. Um, just an example of how like you can do a lot of stuff with one movie. That's why I always get sick of people when they say, "Oh, well, this can be explored in sequels." Like, yeah, but why can't you explore it here? Okay, no fancy tricks, no powers, just Green Goblin beating the crap out of Spider-Man. Right, and it works so well because their earlier fights had those fancy tricks when they're on the glider fighting at the festival, and he battles him for the first time. Then when he goes to rescue the woman from the burning building, and he like scrapes him, which directly leads to him finding out his secret identity when he sees him at the not Thanksgiving, at the that what was it Thanksgiving? When they go to eat together at his apartment with Harry, and he sees that scar on him, and he knows that that's him. So like a lot of the stuff in that film, as much as people like to crap on early 2000 superhero stuff, there's a reason that movie was the best selling superhero movie of all time when it came out. There was a very well constructed story that flowed, and the pacing was great. And you lose a lot of that when the more characters you stick in and the more subplots you try to introduce, which is one of the reasons I was so disappointed with Sandman's inclusion, because as much as I like Spider-Man 3, I felt that if he was given a movie, right, where let's say it's a new iteration of the character or it's the same iteration, but back to his villainous ways, where he's the only villain or one of two villains, he would have a better chance of actually being developed as a character. And I just don't think we were able to get that with this because they have four other villains. But I guess I shouldn't have been surprised if you couldn't get really good development in the movie with two other villains. You're definitely not going to get it in the movie with four other ones. So this last fight in the first Spider-Man movie had higher stakes. When I first saw the kid, I legit thought Green Goblin was going to kill him. Yeah, it's constructed to be that way. Well, pretty much every movie, he's in a really dire state that is entirely believable because of how much blood and like his costume being ripped up, and a lot of the stuff involved with that. I'm just explaining that I prefer the fight in the original film for the reasons I just stated. That from a narrative standpoint, there's a lot more. It's more cathartic to see than this. They hang around each other a little bit. The Green Goblin identity comes out. He fights him one time. They have no interactions between then and the end. And it's really hollow. And it sucks because sometimes people will say, "Oh, this movie's too long," but I think this movie really would have benefited from being 3 hours long. Like I think if they gave him at least one more interaction with him between when they first fight each other and he kills his aunt, and then like the final battle, I'd have liked the conflict between them a lot more. or at least have thought it was presented much better than the way it ended up actually being. Um, so let me also discuss the other two Spider-Men so that we can. But before we do that, we got to mention just the BS that came ahead of their way. For months, people said people associated with the movie said they're not in this movie. Fans online said that's BS. They're in this movie, and I didn't know which to believe. Although I lent more toward the studio because I didn't think they were lying, but also I didn't want to set myself up for disappointment. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna see Toby as Spider-Man again, and then you go and see it, and then he's not there, and you're like, well, this movie sucks because I was intrigued to see this just from them saying Alfred Molina would be coming back after 17 years to play Doc Ock. So they didn't need to like get me with bringing Maguire back as well. Um, but I would say I like their performances. I was happy that they were more than just cameos. But we ran into the same issue here where it's how to explain it. When you have a character, right, who's like you haven't seen in a long time, it always feels as if you expect them to maybe develop them, explain what's happened, and we don't really get that. With the Garfield version of the character, we know that he just kind of like just focuses entirely on being Spider-Man, right? Like no, just that's him entirely. He just gave up on being Peter, pretty much. That's why he doesn't date anybody anymore. And that's a pretty interesting idea that you could explore in a separate movie. But in this film by itself, it just seems like they're kind of it's hollow. I'll put it that way. Um, I say the same thing with the Maguire version, the Raimi version. It's even more disappointing because that was the one I obviously like more than the other two. But I still don't think they did anything with him that remotely was worth the hype of like, oh my god, this actor's coming back for the first time to play this character in fourth. Because there's just not anything really given for his character to do that I find interesting. He's not. He divulges that he had a complicated relationship with Mary Jane, right? We don't know what that means. There's a little bit of banter between him and Holland about, oh, I have, I don't want to talk about the webs that come out of my wrist. Just it's all just surface level stuff to me is I guess the best way to put it. There's vague references to three, but it doesn't really work as far as I'm concerned. I think that, and I've said this before, I would have rather have seen Maguire in a Raimi Spider-Man 4 than some crossover movie where he gets like a couple of scenes to make some jokes and some power showcases. It's just not enough for me. And when you're doing a movie in this universe that like people, because there's a lot of people who just like the MCU that haven't seen earlier superhero movies, which includes the Raimi trilogy. Unfortunately, I say unfortunate because I think those are way better than most of the MCU. Just whatever, my opinion. Um, a lot like if you don't make him an interesting developed character in this movie, right, by itself, a lot of people are just gonna be like, oh, okay, that's another actor that played the character before. They're not gonna have the same emotional connection that someone who's seen the other three will have. And it's kind of a tall order because usually I would say if you've seen the MCU stuff, you'll be attached to this character. Da, 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 da. But those are usually released between 1, 2, 3 years. When you're talking about a version of a character we haven't seen in almost a decade and a half, you're gonna have you're gonna have to do some heavy lifting, and that's one of the issues I think they ran into in this. I think if they had introduced those two versions of the character earlier in the movie, right, and we actually saw them like doing stuff independent of the MCU's version of Peter, I would have had a much better reception to it. But it was okay. It was just like whatever. While I haven't actually watched the movie yet myself, my younger sibling watched it in the pictures and was talking about it was really cool and it's worth rewatching. Yeah, I said in earlier in the review, I like it. It's probably outside of the Raimi trilogy, Into the Spider-Verse and the first TASM, my favorite movie in out of any of these. Um, and it'll probably in the long run end up being the only one of these I rewatch over and over besides the Raimi trilogy, just because it brings back several of the other actors from those films. It's just that I never want to hear somebody say Spider-Man 3 has too many plots, too many characters, oh my god, 3 villains is too many, but then this one has 5 villains and like 8 protagonists. So it's really goofy. The like the double standards that people have. Man, when I was a kid, all people would do was trash that movie. It has too many plots. This is 3 movies in one. And then I see them praising Endgame, even though that has like 8 plots with all the surviving characters from Infinity War. And then this, which has like 6 or 7 plots. Like I don't get people at all, man. I think what ends up happening is someone sets a trend that something is bad, right? And then all the reasons that something is bad just get transferred over to another person. And then even when something else could be argued as having the same issues, they just completely like slide through, like whatever. No, this is a really stuffed movie. It has a whole bunch of characters in it. And I think that a lot of them don't really get anything to do. So that's probably the main issue I have with it. I never want to hear anybody else say 3 is overstuffed again. After if they can give a pass to this. Apparently, more people were hyped of Maguire's reappearance. Well, listen, I said a little bit before you showed up. I liked that he came back. I just don't think they did enough with him that I would remotely believe was worth the wait. I don't think that the character was given anything really interesting to do or anything specific in the story to have a role in. It's just kind of whatever. Like that's my favorite version of the character in live action, and he probably has the least plot significant role out of the 3, which is why he's the last one introduced. Because at least with Garfield, when they have him catch MJ, that's like a clear nod to TASM too, and they have like some more character work that they have in there, like how he's ever since Gwen died just been operating entirely as his secret identity, like as a coping mechanism. Yeah, with Maguire's version, they don't really do enough with him, and it sucks. Like they have his arch nemesis in this, right? And then there's I guess the main specific unique thing he did is stopping the MCU version from impaling the Goblin with the glider. But it's not enough for me. So I really hope he gets to play the character again, preferably in a Raimi Spider-Man 4, or else I'll be very saddened that this is his last appearances as a supporting character with no development in some weird crossover movie. I mean, I guess it's better than a cameo. That's why it feels more like a cameo than actual reappearance or casting character. Well, that's the other issue I have with this movie. They say, oh, this is the same Doc Ock from Spider-Man 2, but he has different hair and he's wearing a different outfit. Oh, this is the same. Basically, there's a lot of continuity errors in this movie with these past films. So, for example, we know for a fact that Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2 didn't know that Norman was Green Goblin because nobody knew that Norman was Green Goblin other than Peter. And then Harry at the end of Spider-Man 2 discovers the lair. So for him to say, you died years ago in battle by it's a complete they either the only explanation is that this is a slightly altered version of what we saw in that movie where the Goblin's identity came out after he died, but it didn't happen in the actual Raimi films. That's just something that they came up with for this. I do plan on watching it. I'm just a little more interested in watching the new Matrix first. I'm glad there's a new Matrix because I'm really sick of the trilogies. I think they're played out. Like if I was a director, I'd be like, all right, if we do one, we're gonna do and it does well, we're gonna do a second one, and if we do a second, we're gonna do 4. No more trilogies. That needs to die. Every time they get to number 3, they're like, all right, time to reboot, time to finish it. Megumi, I say with no happiness that this film they handle I would say Green Goblin and Doc Ock from the Raimi films pretty decently as far as like they indisputably get the most to do of any of the returning villains. Um, but I just don't think Maguire was handled that well. I feel like they threw him in. They felt like they had to include him because he's the original live action Spider-Man. So we have to stick him in here as well. And we're gonna have a little goofy scene where he's talking about, I don't want to tell you about how my webs feel when they come out of me, and that's about it. They give him a reunion with Doc Ock, and it's supposed to be sentimental because Doc Ock, saw him as a kid, 2004, whatever, and now he's an adult or much more older, whatever. And it's only for like 20 seconds. And it sucks because they have Doc Ock turn good by the first half of the movie, and then he just disappears for like 15 or 20 minutes. Like it would have been so much more interesting. They have this scene, Megumi, where all the three different Peters are making like serums to cure the villains. It would have been so cool to have Doc Ock in that because he's also a scientist. He's also very smart. And it's like they had some weird mandate that they couldn't allow, the past villains to like be like any of them, right? To be in a scene with the three Spider-Men, like outside of costume, which is really weird because everyone knows that, in this reality that Peter is Spider-Man. So I don't, what I'm saying? It's such a waste of a character. But again, I will still say that he's treated, along with Green Goblin, the best out of any of the returning villains because they get the most screen time, the most plot importance. There's a lot of, for the most part, it's respectful. I just think the movie has too many characters, and unfortunately, even the ones that get the most attention, I still feel like they could have done a little bit more with. Like if you gave Doc Ock a scene where he's like helping the three Spider-Men make the cures because he's the only one that gets cured at the apartments. And if you gave at least one more fight or interaction between the MCU Spider-Man and Green Goblin, between the first fight they have and the final battle of the movie, I would have been a lot more content with their roles. I still will say for the most part it's done well, but that would have really helped the overall story for me. Like I'd be like, okay, because this leans more into that version of Green Goblin as being this like really evil person, and this leans more into Doc Ock being redeemed, right? Like he's helping them, and he does actually get to do something very impactful during the final battle with Electro. But it's so sad that they're all just a little bit more could have done so much for that final scene. I also was very happy that initial reports said that they were going to kill off all the villains. They don't. They just have them go back to their universes cured. I was very happy about that because I think it's really stupid to take two of Spider-Man's arch enemies which are Doc Ock and Green Goblin, and then it's okay. They're going to be in this one weird crossover movie, and then we're going to wash our hands of them completely. Basically, they left the door open for them to come back. I don't think they will, personally, because I'm not going to get my hopes up. But I would really like it if we get Defoe as Green Goblin again, and that's why I said that I think it's such a weird choice to have this alternate version of Green Goblin, right? Kill one of the few recurring characters in this series that, and clearly the one that means the most to Peter, just to have him be disposed of after one movie like all the rest of the MCU villains. How would you say the story was handled? I'm going into No Way Home blind. Um, oh my God, I don't. Well, this is a spoiler review. I don't want you to hear all these spoilers because then you're gonna get mad and block me, and probably write a 9 sentence essay about how I destroyed the movie for you. Even though I said in the video, I was like, hey, these are spoilers. Don't watch if you don't want to be spoiled. I really don't want to spoil this for anybody. That's why I put spoiler in the title. I don't want to, get anyone upset at me. Like, oh, look at what you did. I'd say the story was handled pretty decently. I like that we get The idea of him having his identity revealed to the world and then trying to use Doctor Strange to reverse it, but then like screwing up the. I find all of that interesting. Um, the main issues I have with this movie are that it has too many characters, and there are a lot of interesting plot ideas that they just don't have enough time to commit themselves to. Like, for example, they bring back Sandman. He's introduced fairly early on, but outside of two times where he shows off his powers, he has like four, five, six lines throughout the whole thing, seven. And that really sucks because I said before, I think that Thomas Hayden Church was a great Sandman, looks like him. If I read a comic, I actually hear his voice because he doesn't really have an animated counterpart. I find like synonymous with, just he's my ideal version of Sandman, right? And it really sucked that he was part of a movie that had two other villains because I think he could carry a film by himself. I thought, okay, well, they're bringing him back, so maybe we might get it. But somehow he ends up with even less attention in Spider-Man 3. So that's why I said this movie. I hope after people see it, no one tries to tell me that three villains was too many when this one has five. And out of the five, the only two that really get to do something like profound and impactful, and like continued focus and plot importance are Green Goblin and Doc Ock. I'd say Electro is mostly a plot device, and the other two are just kind of there because, oh, remember that movie? Like really, like Sandman and Lizard really feel like they're there just because they had some mandate that they have to have every movie's villain, or at least every movie has to have a villain from it come back, like before the MCU. Like we can't use Venom because of copyright, and we want to also do the new Sony version, and we can't use Harry because James Franco got Me Too. So let's bring back Sandman. I actually like Sandman a lot. He was a cool and had a bit of complexity to his character, right? And that's why I said I was excited at the idea of him coming back. But he's not given anywhere near. Like if you want to see Sandman done in a movie, just go watch Spider-Man 3. They don't do anything with him here that wasn't done there better. Um, and I don't enjoy saying that because I like Thomas Hayden Church as an actor. I like that like the idea of him not being able to turn normal because his powers are deteriorating is interesting, but it's just not given enough attention. So yeah, I would definitely go recommend Spider-Man 3 over this. If you want to see like Sandman done well or like done all right, go pop that movie in. I would say go watch The Amazing Spider-Man if you want to see Lizard done right, but I don't know how much of that statement I'm willing to stand by. I'm gonna turn the whole city into lizards. Why? Because I feel like it. So, in other words, he gets overlooked in favor of the other character. Yes, this movie has five villains, but it really only has one major villain with Green Goblin, and then one villain who turns good, Doc Ock. Which again, if you've seen Spider-Man 2, completely believable. Um, and then three other villains who are just there to like serve the main villain of Green Goblin. That's pretty much it. No, I'll watch this again because I really loved what they did with Green Goblin and Doc Ock. But if you're looking for any major stuff from the other three, you're not going to get it. And one of the reasons for that is because they know, which villains are the most iconic, which are the most fondly remembered. Yeah, five villains. Remember, Spider-Man 3 was overstuffed. It had three villains, but five isn't overstuffed at all. This movie should have been probably 2.5 hours or 3 hours. Like they could have added another 30 minutes to this, and it would have been totally appropriate. Appropriate rather. I'll say inappropriate. No, they don't develop any of them other than just the same two I mentioned before. because those are the most well liked. No, I really love what they did with the Green Goblin. Even if I do think he doesn't get like there's a part of the movie where he just vanishes from. I just really hope that these that how do I explain it? It looks like they're gonna do this the same way they do it most of, like for whatever reason the MCU still has this one villain, was it one movie throwaway villain syndrome where they'll have some like really interesting villain or some bland villain, give or take, and then they'll just never use them again. So I really hope that if we get another trilogy, which is what people keep telling me, but I'm doubtful of that. If we get another trilogy, they use some of these actors again because they're pumping one of these out every 2 years, so they can use all like the de aging technology on Defoe and Molina looked really good. You would think it was still 2002 or three or four from the way they look. Yeah, this film has a lot of characters and a lot of good ideas, but just not enough time to develop it. Like that whole earlier plot, like the movie opens up with this like really interesting plot of how the world reacts to Spider-Man. Does he face any legal troubles? And then it's just all hand waved by a certain character from a Netflix show. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's cool that we saw him, but I wanted to see what that would look like. Like what 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 does the world think of this? Whatever. It's another one of those things where it feels like it gets glossed over excessively early. So he didn't really die in the first movie. Guess that'll be going into spoiler territory if I were to ask how he's in the movie. Well, no, the idea is that the multiverse, which is the explanation for how they're able to use these past iterations of the characters, is able to like snatch a villain from right before they died. So like Doc Ock is apparently from when he's grabbing Spider-Man with his tentacle at the end of two, and he just gets pulled into this universe. So that's how they're able to still be alive without, just in spite of having died in the original film that they were in. I'm just waiting for some clown to crash the stream and start talking about but let's not jinx it. I told you that it's the funniest thing. You always talk about the same, but then you do something different. Why aren't you talking about the it's you just can't win. Also, the Raimi version of Mary Jane is mentioned twice. She's mentioned at the start when Doc Ock says to MCU Spider-Man while thinking he's the version from his timeline, I should have killed your girlfriend when I had the chance. And then she's also mentioned by Peter later on when he talks about his relationship with her. Also, Kirsten Dunst said that she's not opposed to playing Mary Jane again if asked. So I think the reason that they like basically I walked away from this more convinced that we could like there's how to explain it. The fact that they kept all of them alive, all the villains, all the both the other two Spider-Men, really it convinces me that we're probably going to get more stuff with them in it, is what I believe. Like I don't believe that they would purposely keep all of them alive and then just we're never going to see any of them. I don't buy it. So I think in probably like a year or two you'll hear about somebody from this coming back for something other than Holland. I like Kirsten Dunst. She's the best MJ for me. Yeah, I a lot of people trash her performance because they're like, oh, damsel in distress. But I mean, who wouldn't be kidnapped by the superpowered villain when they know you're like the easiest thing to do to get to the hero is to grab you? I've seen so many like alternate versions of like so many people have written like fan versions of Spider-Man 4 where she dies or like gets put in a coma or some crazy thing. I'm like, yeah, wait a great way to underscore the entire series. Like it starts with her in the bus, and then it's gonna like he's like, oh, it all started because of a girl, and then oh, the same girl we're gonna like throw away after 3 movies and have a new love interest. Yeah, that's totally something Raimi would have done. I tell you, people don't even know what they're talking about anymore with this stuff. They just like that's why I said those fan versions of that movie always had me laughing. Pretty much every fan version of Spider-Man 4 I see has yeah, complete joke. But they always have like the same two plot points of either Mary Jane dies or Aunt May dies. It's like we just had one of the main protagonists die in the last movie with Harry. You really think they're gonna kill off somebody else? Yeah, people have a strange obsession with killing a character's love interest just for the sake of trauma. Well, what it is, a lot of people who like the Raimi trilogy don't like her as a character, so they're like, okay, well, as quickly as we can, let's ditch her for Black Cat. That's why people are so weird with just how they act about this stuff. But the other thing that's weird, we saw before, and we were talking about this on another stream, Akatsuki Merchant. You notice how like, because I always explain to this one person. It has been said that if they did a Spider-Man 4 back in 2011, right, they would have brought back Gwen from Spider-Man 3 that was played by Bryce Dallas Howard. And this guy was like, oh, they were going to have her be in a love triangle. I was like, no, like Raimi is not insane. Like, I'm not saying this one's wrong, but like, there's no way in hell Raimi would have a love square between Peter, Mary Jane, Black Cat, and Gwen. Like, you wouldn't. That's like a cartoon. That's something you might see in like a parody video on this website. And we were talking about how like it's so unfortunate when there's an interesting character and a lot of fans just see them as this love interest, so they believe that if they're in it, they have to be the love interest. It's like I don't know why she couldn't just be his classmate that uncovers his secret identity and then assists in defeating the villain by building something. It's like they really have this belief that if there is a female character who's the same age as a male character or the main protagonist, whatever, they have to be the love interest, and it's like a really sexist, weird position that people have about this stuff. Black Cat, another interesting character. Well, she's in TASM too, but she's not as excuse me, as Black Cat. She's just Felicia. That's one of the reasons that I have an issue with TASM too. It's like that movie tries to set up 5 other movies that never got made because it bombed so badly. It's so underperformed. They were like, let's cancel all of this. Some fans really do wish for ridiculous things. It knows no bounds. Well, that's one of the reasons I wasn't like people always say, I want TASM 3, I want TASM 3. But every time I hear about what TASM 3 actually was, I'm glad it didn't happen. Like they were talking about having him resurrect Gwen and her dad and bringing people back from the dead. I don't want to see that. I already said if they want to bring Garfield back as Spider-Man, what I think they should do is just redo the second one. Just call it Amazing Spider-Man Continues. Have it set 10 years after the first one. Just completely delete that second one. That was just the worst one out of any of these by far. No, every time I hear about the plot of TASM 3, I just sit there vomiting. Like I don't know why anybody would want this. Like even if you're a fan of of the Garfield version of the character, why don't you want a better script? Megumi, I'm gonna ask you: do you want to see a movie where Spider-Man goes around resurrecting people from the dead, like some damn red and blue Frankenstein's monster parody? A lot of people don't care much about the story; they just want to see their favorite characters. Okay, look, I really like the Raimi trilogy's version of Harry, right? But if I wanted to bring him back, have him get resurrected, I wouldn't have Peter do it because that makes him look creepy and like a freak. Like if I like for example, you have Miles Warren, the Jackal from the comics, right? Brings people back to life with his clones. Um, you could have him be the one that brings these different villains back to life to get revenge on Spider-Man, in like a movie, for example. But the idea of of Spider-Man, right? Bringing people that died back to life, I just think is really weird. Now, see, this movie's way more interesting with that concept because it's about him wanting to prevent the villains from dying in their timeline by curing them. I find that way more interesting and believable and much more noble than I'm going to resurrect people and be a crypt keeper and go to the cemetery and spill some acid. Like I'm like I said, if you want to bring back Garfield for a movie, just redo two and do a three after that. I really do not want to see the further progressions of that story because it sounded insane. To hell with the story, and it's such a they really just they don't even care, man. Like I'm not even the biggest TASM fan, and I've done my own rewrites of TASM too. It really is like that. People don't care about the story; they just want to see their what was it? Where is it? Okay, a lot of people don't care much about the story; they just want to see their favorite character. Yeah, but I was completely fine with Melina coming back and it being a new Doc Ock that's just villainous, right? Um, but when they said it's the same one from two, I started becoming curious. I was like, how are they going to handle this? Are they going to mess it up? And I thought they did a pretty good job. Um, it's just like and it's the same thing with the Maguire version of Spider-Man. It's like that's my favorite one of these three by a country mile. But if you're not going to do anything with him that I find interesting, what's the point? Like you could pretty much cut him out of this movie, and you really nothing would be lost. And I don't enjoy saying that at all. But it's sad. Again, I was happy to see him. I'm glad it wasn't a cameo. I just think they could have done more with him, and they had too much stuff in the movie. They was overstuffed, and it would have been overstuffed no matter if him and Garfield were in it or not, because you were dealing with five villains and like five supporting characters in addition. It was always going to have too much stuff in it, pretty much. I still think the movie would have been better if it was just Green Goblin, Electro, and Doc Ock, and then like Green Goblin manipulates Electro, and then Doc Ock helps Spider-Man fight them. I would that would have been so much better. It would have had less characters. Everybody would have had some specific role to play. You know, I just think Lizard and Sandman don't do anything. That's my biggest issue with it. So, in a way, do you think the movie is a little bit of a letdown with their lack of use for Maguire? Well, I think he definitely gets more than the cameo, but it's just they don't do anything with him that I find remotely interesting. They make vague allusions to the events of Spider-Man 3, first one, the second one, and then stuff that happened afterward. But if this isn't, I'll put it this way: this movie will probably look better in retrospect if they actually make a Raimi Spider-Man 4, or at least use Maguire for something else that like expands on what happened after 3. But if this is truly his last appearance, it is a very somber uh, letdown for me personally because there's not really anything for him to do here that I find interesting. The best characters of this movie are the MCU's version of Spider-Man. I can't believe I'm saying that. Doc Ock, Green Goblin, to an extent, Electro. That's pretty much it. I think the other two Spider-Men are like their roles. I definitely like. I think Akatsuki Merchant. Have you seen Ghostbusters Afterlife? I just want to ask because I don't know, but I'd say their roles are probably. I'd give it maybe a 6 out of 10, a 7 out of 10. Like I give the movie an 8 out of 10. I like it, but I'd say their roles are like mostly good just because they get multiple scenes. But like actual character work, there's just not that much of it. It's the same thing with anime. They don't care about the story or the impact of the dynamic between characters. They just want to see their characters interact with each other and tell the and tell the same dry jokes. Yeah, they don't really try to do anything unique. At least when I was trying to do my own fan version of Spider-Man 4, I actually like tried to write a script and I was like, you gotta have a compelling villain. You have to give each of the characters here something to do, like some kind of arc, you know. Because when you do a movie, you have to make every minute count. And there's just seems like a lot of stuff in this that kind of doesn't get enough attention. Like I think the film would be would be better, not much better, but like at least by a whole point if they just had three villains. Um, because like I said, those three all have some specific role to play, and the other two are just kind of there because they had some kind of mandate that they didn't disclose of having to use a villain from every non-MCU movie for the character. It's just it's so sad. I wanted Thomas Hayden Church to get a second chance so badly, and like it's just this weird cameo-esque role. Like I think his even though he has multiple scenes, I think his role is a cameo. Him and Lizard. And then they have a nerve to fancy themselves better wishers than the authors who created their favorite media and they'll rewrite their characters. Oh man, I don't really like any of these movies more than the comics. Other than maybe the Raimi trilogy. Like I go and pop in the first 100 issues of Amazing and go read that before I watch TASM 2 again. No, I don't trust any of the people on here when they start talking crazy like that. This movie writer is better than a comic writer. Because most of the people that say that have never even read comics or they've read like one issue or something. That was always my funniest thing, my favorite thing about like movie reviewers who try to criticize the writing of something, like to where they specifically say they're focusing on the writing, but then they can't even read a book with pictures. Like I think something about that's so ironic. You know, because I said before, I actually am a Spider-Man fan. I actively read several hundred comics at the start of this year. You know, saw different cartoons, etc. So I like to believe I know what I'm talking about. And again, I don't present this as like the end all be all. Like this movie sucks. This movie is great. I let you come to your own conclusion. I say this is what I liked. This is what I didn't like. You know, so on and so forth. Ugh. You should see Naruto fan fiction. So many people, yeah, they love that stupid character. Not Naruto, the other one you mentioned. I don't want to say his name. I'm not trying to get PTSD flashbacks of, of watching a whole 500 episode show dedicated to bringing him back. But anyway, let me explain what I. Oh, the other thing. Now listen, I didn't see Venom 2. I just read the plot summary. I didn't see it because I didn't feel like going. I'm not really a theater type person. I like to go when I have somebody else with me. And when I don't, it's just kind of like whatever. Um, but the end of the movie has Venom end up in the MCU, and so many people are going, "Oh my god, Venom is going to be this major player in No Way Home, even though he hasn't been in the trailers. He's gonna be the sixth member of the Sinister Six in this movie." And all he does is show up in the post credit scene. We live in the cameo era. Like I'm so glad I didn't see that movie in theaters just to see like, oh, how is this going to tie into the MCU? Because I would have been just as let down as everybody else. I'm glad he didn't have a major role because it's got enough characters already. So that was just a funny little thing to point out. Okay, good to hear this kind of feedback of the movie. Yeah, I think I liked it. I think that if you enjoyed the original trilogy, it honors everyone from that for the most part. And even if I don't think it does that much with Sandman and Maguire as Peter, I was just happy to see them again after so long. But the highlights really are Defoe and Molina. They are the ultimate like duo, and to see them like the only other thing I've seen them together in was like they have this one scene. I don't know who photo who recorded it, but it basically during the making of Spider-Man 2, it during the scene where Doc Ock gets his tentacles, like he's showing off how the tentacles work, and he's in that room, and like the stuff starts breaking. They had Alfred Molina watch Willem Dafoe with the like stuff on. He's like, and it was so funny just seeing the two like those two together because they're both in the movie, but one is a hallucination, one is actually there, so they don't directly interact with each other. So they're the best. Like they alone are worth seeing this movie for. Um, hell, you should rename this Spider-Man: The Return of Green Goblin and Doc Ock, and I would have been more excited than like you know the other stuff that's in it. No, I was surprised with how they handled Green Goblin. I thought it was great. And again, Doc Ock gets a lot of love too. I would have preferred if they just did one more scene for both of them, but you know what? At least they still get the most out. I think out of any of the characters, definitely out of the villains, they get the most screen time. But I think the only characters that get more to do than them are probably just Peter and his like two little friends, like MJ and Ned, and that's about it. Now they gave the best villains the most to do, and I like that. Oh, me neither, Megumi. I like his brother because I find Itachi interesting. Just kill your whole clan and then like the motivations behind doing it. Um, but the reason I like him much better is because the narrative of the series doesn't try to make you forgive him for what he did. He's treated as an antagonist for most of it. The series doesn't like try to manipulate you into liking someone that does despicable things. Like so many people will forget that Naruto has a literal demon living in his body just to make look like man, I'm so tired of that stupid character. I'm sick of I think Shippuden would have been so much better if they revealed that he got his body possessed by Orochimaru and they just moved on to other stuff. But that's I want to we can discuss that at some other point. I want to just cap off what I've been saying here. Um, After seeing this and the ending that it has, I'm more convinced more than ever that we might actually get other stuff with the other two Spider-Man. I think that Marvel is becoming more open to like doing stuff with them, to just saying, you know what, there were these fans of these past series, and this kind of is the nostalgia era. Like you look at Flash, and they're bringing back, Michael Keaton after he hasn't played Batman in 30 years. Um, there's a very strong likelihood that we'll maybe we don't directly get a Spider-Man 4, but I would find it hard to believe we don't see these actors appear in other stuff after this, especially given the fact that Raimi is direct, the Raimi is directing Doctor Strange 2, which is probably going to be the only movie I see in theaters next year. That movie has like it's him and then Danny Elfman, who was a composer for the first two Spider-Man movies. So like it's hard for me to believe that like as they're working with more and more people that worked on those, they're just gonna be like, oh yeah, whatever. We're not gonna see these actors again. Nope. But yeah, I think it was good. I liked it. Um, It's so funny that people were saying they weren't going to see the movie because if Maguire and Garfield weren't in it, because I think the villains and Holland by himself carried it. It's I don't know. It's just I guess for me, it's kind of weird seeing Maguire. Like if he doesn't have Aunt May or Mary Jane or Harry or any of them to play off of, it's like a lot of the appeal of that character is the world that he's from, and when you don't bring back anyone other than people that he traded fists with for him to directly like him and um Green Goblin don't actually talk to each other at all. Um, he gets a scene where he interacts with Doc Ock, but he doesn't interact with the Goblin, which really sucks because that's I would say that's out of any of the five villains from the Raimi trilogy, the one that had the biggest impact on his character arc in those films. So it's really strange. I know what you mean when you say that. No, I would give their handling of Green Goblin an either an 8 or 9 out of 10. Their handling of Doc Ock probably an 8 or 9 out of 10, and then their handling of Maguire and Garfield. I'd give their handling of Garfield probably a 7 out of 10, and then Maguire like a 6. Again, I was just happy it was more than one scene, all the way at the end, like I thought it would be. You should have seen how reluctant I was to believe he was in because it's just because he hasn't acted in anything in so long. Like he hasn't had an on-screen appearance in the movie since I was in high school. So I was really just I couldn't believe it, mainly for that. And I didn't want to be let down. No, that's the biggest issue with his character in the movie. Like he doesn't have anyone that he actually knows to like him and Jameson, for example. Same actor from the Raimi trilogy, J.K. Simmons. No interactions. Um, you know, Harry, Mary Jane, Aunt May. Like if he doesn't have those characters to interact with, it's harder to like actually do stuff with him that I find interesting. That's why when they said last year that Dunst was going to come back and play Mary Jane, along with Garfield, I thought what was going to happen was they were going to have her like interact with the two Spider-Men, and then like at the end, her and Holland would go to the Raimi verse, and then he would meet, Maguire's version of the character. I think that would have been more interesting than just let's have the three Spider-Men together, because then you could have spent like some time with just Garfield by himself, and then with like the I guess love interest of the original trilogy that also kind of like gives her a role that's not just being the love interest. So that was originally what I thought was going to happen when they were confirmed or like talked about as having being in consideration for a role in this. I'm still very intrigued to know how he is in the movie. According to some people who've seen Sam McGuire look good too, even though he's aged. Well, look, I mean, we're all aging. Like, I don't. I believe fully that if they wanted to, they could get him to be Spider-Man for another 5 movies. They have remember, Molina and Defoe are 20 years older than him. And guess what they did? They used the aging technology and CGI to make them able to do things of someone that's not their age would be able to do. No, they can do anything they want. We could get a Spider-Man 4, 5, 6, 7 like that. They could easily do that with the aging technology they have. Or if they want to just have it set 20 years after the original three, that's fine by me as well. Don't let anybody tell you that he's too old because remember, the villains are 20 years older than him, literal retirement age, and they're still playing who they want to play. So I don't buy it. And dude, they act like Garfield is a spring chicken. Like Garfield's 8 years younger, right? But I mean, he's not like he's 2 years away from being 40, is what I'm saying. He's middle aged as well. I don't get people at all. They're so irritating. Just I don't know why we can't just have like why is it so bad to have an older version of Peter? Why can't I just get one live action version that's married, has a kid? You want to have him in high school for 50 movies with Holland, whatever, but I don't get why it's such a big issue for, to just have the character grow up. I think that's bizarre. even though he's aged. I forgot her name. It's like Femke Jensen. The lady that played Jean Grey in the original X-Men series, she talked about when they recasted her character in whatever movie that was, Days of Future Past, that Hollywood has a big problem with older actresses and how, she felt marginalized because of her age. So I'm never against anyone coming back. If they want to bring, some actress back or actor to play a character 10, 20, 30 years later and they can still do it, have at it. I don't know. We just live in an era where people, like, with de-aging technology, you could realistically get 10 movies of someone playing a character, and looking the exact same. Like the de-aging technology on Doc Ock and Green Goblin is terrific. So if they want to do the same thing with McGuire, I would be all for it. No, they kill me with this stuff. People always just have an issue with everything is the problem. What else I can say? It was just nice to see a lot of the characters again. Oh, need to follow the status quo, similar to how Ash never really ages after in Pokemon. Dude, if you watch Pokemon from start to finish, you'll see so many continuity errors. Like, there's an episode in Advanced Generation, or rather, excuse me, the Battle Frontier. It's the one where it's the final Frontier brain, and he gets Charizard, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur like back on his team, and he's like talking about how the years have gone by with them as his oldest Pokemon or whatever. And then later in the series, they're like, oh, he is still 10 years old. And then when they come back to Viridian City in the original series, um, which is like episode 50 something, 60 something, they mention it's been a year since they started. So that show, you can tell it wasn't made with the intent of running this damn long. No, I think you'll probably enjoy it. It's definitely going to be one I rewatch. Like, out of any of the MCU Spider-Man movies, this is easily my favorite, and definitely the one. Like, if I get this on DVD, I'll see this thing like 10 times. Because we've never really had something like this where it's like multiple film series. Usually, when they reboot, they just completely ignore the past versions. We've never just had some movie that says this is the history of this series. Here are all the different versions of the character. I think there's something in there for everybody. Like, if you're a fan of Tasm, you get Lizard again, even though it's a cameo. You get Electro again, you get Garfield again. You know, and if you're a Raimi fan, you get the two best live action villains as the main antagonist and the ones that get the most focus. They knew when they did that, like, what the deal was. It's like, you really think we're gonna have Defoe as Green Goblin again and just focus on Lizard? Damn, I wish we could have gotten I think I'm just reminded of Lizard from the Raimi movies, how we never actually saw that pay off. That would have been so cool. It wouldn't have been in four, but they probably could have done it in like 5 or 6 or something. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it when I do. Yeah, overall I'd give it an 8 out of 10. And I think with enough time, it probably will end up being my fourth favorite of the live action movies, like my favorite outside of the Raimi trilogy. Again, I still prefer Tasm, the first one, because it seemed a lot more focused, than this. But I still like it. Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was good. I'm not when I criticize something, It's merely for me making suggestions of what I think would have been serviceable or what's a good way of saying it? Benefiting to what they already had. I'll put it that way. I think it has the same like overstuffed syndrome that three has with the villains, but the things they choose to focus on are interesting, and you have a lot of really good performances. Yeah, I said that earlier. Soap. I mentioned that we never got to see Doc Ock and Green Goblin interact, before. So I was happy that that came to pass. Oh, almost stepped over my charger. Let me see. That Kotsky merchant write anything else? No, he was talking about that other show, that irrelevant show. But yeah, Megumi, I am sorry if I've spoiled anything for you. I put in the title. This is a spoiler talk. Um, I'm not a douchebag, so I'm not trying to reveal things on purpose that'll like ruin your enjoyment or whatever. Five villains, though, that's quite a lot when you think about it. Yeah, and remember, Spider-Man 3 is bad because it has three villains. That's too many, but five isn't. Like I said, only about maybe two of them actually get like a big role. The other three are just there to service the other two. It's just funny that they were like I had this weird gut feeling it would be overstuffed, and it's got a lot of characters in it. They managed to put everything in place, though they did it right this time. I mean, if you say so. I just would have preferred if Sandman and Lizard had more than cameos. Like Lizard literally gets captured off screen and just even when they're at the apartment, he's sitting inside of a cell by himself, not interacting with anybody. Like there is absolutely no development of that character in any conceivable way. So that's what I was talking about when I said that they have five villains, and out of the five of them, maybe two of them actually get, really big starring roles, and the other three are just kind of there to service the big two of Doc Ock and Green Goblin. Which is why I said that I would have preferred if they just had three, because Electro actually serves a role in the plot. He's the one that gets captured before Doctor Strange catches up with Peter. And they start devising the plot to go back to the apartment, and then he's the one that gets manipulated by Goblin. Oh, Venom was nowhere to be seen until the post-credit scene. You remember? And then he gets teleported back to his universe. Dude, that was the funniest thing ever. People really saw Venom 2 and they're like, oh man, he's gonna be in No Way Home. It's like, oh yeah, he's in No Way Home, all right. Well, they can't use him, remember? They Sony, well, how to explain it? I have very little expectation that they probably wanted to use the Venom from that movie because they're trying to apparently do a crossover with the current Venom, the Tom Hardy version. So I'm not surprised they didn't use that one. And we all know why they didn't use Harry. He touched me, he touched me, he touched me. I mean, hell, where was what's the other Harry? Dane DeHaan, where was he? We had like three different villains that didn't show up. I was fine with that. They did it right this time. No, they didn't. Megumi, I just hope you don't walk in there thinking you're going to get five interesting, compelling, fleshed out antagonists. You're not. You're going to get two, and maybe a third one if you think about it. Maybe because he said expect his best friend in the spell. I mean, you can ask the writers of the movie. They just they pick and choose who they want to bring back. They don't have any reason that they couldn't bring back Dahan if they wanted to, but they didn't ask him apparently. Yeah, I would say the acting was the best part. The story's all right. And the weakest part's probably I think it was overstuffed. Like I think this movie really would have benefited from being at least another 15 minutes long, or maybe 3 hours. They were like people were calling this Spider-Man Endgame, make it be the definitive finale. And I think it took a little bit too long to introduce the other two versions of the character. I think they should have showed up earlier. But I really can't wait to see this on DVD or on. It's not gonna be on Disney Plus, but on some kind of other like more intimate. Because I just got so sick of them screaming like every time Maguire or Garfield does some, just I got sick of that. Well, see, that's why I said you can have this many villains and characters, but you have to give them time to do stuff. For example, with Sandman, he mentions wanting to see his daughter. He mentions that he's been turned into the sand creature. We don't know how that happened. We don't know if his daughter is still as sick as she was during Spider-Man 3. And if they gave the movie another 10 minutes or 15, we could have had a scene where he describes that to Peter when they're in the apartment. So, I'm not, none of this is said as some attempt to make you dislike the film. It's just me saying that they have a lot of plot elements and specific character um, motivations that I don't think are given enough time because they don't have it. Yeah, this movie really would have benefited from being 2.5 hours or 3 hours. Either length would have been fine by me. And I think it would make it's so funny. People always talk about like, oh my god, everybody hates longer movies, and then you see Endgame breaking all these world records and becoming the most highest gross movie of all time. Before Avatar came back and stole the crown again. I don't even take people seriously with movie length anymore. Like I remember when I was a kid, people would say The Dark Knight was too long, and then you see some of this other stuff that's come out since then. I'm looking at you, Snyder Cut. It depends on the flowness of the movie. I mean, we're all going to have different opinions on how well paced something is. I'm simply explaining that there are multiple characters in the film that have roles in the story which are not expanded upon as much as I think they should be. And I gave examples of how if the movie was longer, they could have done some more things to not make that the case. Well, considering how there are a lot of characters, it's kind of like if someone's there for everyone. But that's why I said that my idea was solely based around servicing the plot they already have. So if you say, hey, let's at that during that apartment scene have a part where Sandman like actually details what happened to him, he'd be a more developed character than he is in this film because my only attachment to him is that he was in Spider-Man 3. So all the character work was done in this other movie. Which is not my criticism at all of Doc Ock and Green Goblin because they're both given enough time and specific attention to warrant actually being invested in them in spite of not having seen those films before. Even if the main draw for me was seeing them again after having seen those films before. That's why I said that out of the five villains, those are the two most developed ones by a country mile. I mean, I gave examples of what I was talking about, so I'm not going to sit here and keep repeating myself. This person asked me what I want after this. I'm not sure. I feel like they should do Craven, but they're gonna apparently Sony's gonna do a movie with him, so whatever. I'd like to see them finally pay off on that Scorpion idea that they had in Homecoming, where he was sitting up in jail. If they've confirmed the symbiote as existing in the MCU, so with Matt Gargan having first been Scorpion and then becoming Venom, you could have both him assume both those identities over a movie or two. Uh, and also that would give J.K. Simmons another reason to have a big role in a Spider-Man movie because Jameson is essential to the origin of Scorpion in most media anyway. What else I can say? I would like to see Defoe play Green Goblin again, just because it really after this it seems like he's the arch nemesis to this version of Peter too. But I don't know if let's go ahead of saying it. I'm not. I guess the issue you're going to run into there is then does it have to be another alternate version of him, right? Like because the one at the end of this is cured. So uh, if they did pull out another alternate version, I'd be fine with it. By the way, so out of the villains, he's probably one I want to see the most. And if they wanted to have Doc Ock come back again, I would have no issue with that either. Um, what else is there? I still want Raimi Spider-Man 4. I feel like Maguire is well enough to do it, and I think with Raimi having become part of the MCU after Doctor Strange 2 is done filming, he can talk a bit more about that. Um, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. So so you use some more of the Sinister Six type villains in their supposed next trilogy they're claiming to have, and give me some kind of swan song to the Raimi verse, and I'll be pretty content. Of course, we probably won't get that. We'll get some goofy crap. No, the Venom from Sony is in a different universe. He got teleported to the MCU in the Venom 2 post credit scene, then goes back to his universe right after that. I think somebody's put the post credit scene on you. That was the funniest thing that like people are going to movie theaters and they stick their camera up to record it, and then Sony's like, but I want to go back to what Megumi said about how since there's so many characters, it's kind of like someone's there for everyone. That's definitely true. But even if I'm not the biggest MCU Spider-Man fan, I still think Holland did a good job. He probably has my third favorite performance of the movie outside of Defoe and Molina. They really do just like the three of them carry this. I'd say everybody else is all right. It's usually just an issue of screen time and like not being given enough to work with. Well, as far as we know, they didn't ask Dane DeHaan to come back, which I mean, as much as I'm not a fan of TASM 2, I still would have. I'm not against them. Like if they had him be Harry in the MCU, I'd be fine with that. Like have him as Harry and then Defoe as Norman. I'd be completely content with them doing that because I know they can't use Franco again, mainly because of the scandal he got caught up in. That's one of the things that sucks about like waiting so long to do a movie like this. Like if this was made, let's say 5 years ago, hell, even 3 years ago, we could have really gotten pretty much everyone back. Like you know what I'm saying? Like it's so sad when you know that like he's entirely inaccessible because of this relatively recent scandal that they had like over 10 years to work with him and they didn't. I'm getting some Ghostbusters flashbacks. It's like, oh yeah, let's not make a sequel for 20 years, and then oh no, one of the main actors passed away. Oh, and now we're gonna do a reboot. I mean, just look it up. I'm not trying to get demonetized by specifically mentioning what happened. I'm just saying that if they had done this, let's say 3, 4, 5 years ago, um, you would have been able to use the original Harry actor as well. And that's one of the issues I have with this movie's usage of Maguire's Spider-Man. He doesn't have anyone from his own universe to really play off of, other than Doc Ock, which is just one interaction. Like him and Green Goblin don't even directly speak to each other throughout the whole runtime of the movie. And you could chalk it up to them only being in one scene together, but it still is like, you know, a missed opportunity in my view. And I guess maybe because for me, a lot of the stuff with the Raimi trilogy is like centered around the Goblin and his legacy, which lives through Harry. So to just like have them together in starring roles in something for the first time in almost 20 years, and then just no interactions, I thought was really goofy. But it's just an example of too many characters. Because if I remember correctly, they have Garfield interact one time with both Electro and Lizard. Although I do like the interaction he had with Lizard pretty well. Not Lizard, Electro, because they were talking about oh, you were such a nice guy, and they make like a little reference to Miles, everybody's favorite character for some reason. Megumi hates me. He's never gonna watch me again. I spoiled the movie for him. I don't feel bad because I put on the thing spoilers. I know some people they actually like will put I explain it. They'll get like a Photoshop screenshot of it, or they'll just put some screenshot from the movie that just spoils stuff. Like they'll go to the theater, record the screen, take a screenshot, and make that the thumbnail. I didn't do that. I have no images, nothing. Just someone speaking and saying, "Hey, don't watch this if you don't want to be spoiled." Said at the start of the stream. Got it in the title. I don't feel bad. No, I think after this, Marvel is gonna. This is like Marvel's last hurrah. Like I don't see them doing anything else that reaches this level of anticipation. Because I remember people were saying when Endgame came out that the MCU had peaked. I think this is where they peak. They're gonna have to come up with something really compelling to top the hype for this. Because everybody and their mother was trying to see this. Like people don't even like it was really crazy. Because I was on the internet for all of these in their releases after the third one, or I guess from the third one onward, and none of the other ones were talked about this much. So that should tell you something. All right, Megumi, do you have anything else to say? Because I want to wrap this up. Kotsky Merchant, either of you? Any further comments, statements, thoughts, theories, concerns? Because on Monday, I'm going to talk about this crazy person I met on Discord a few days ago, and some of the insane stuff they've been saying. So we'll definitely get back to the wackiness of online people in no time flat. I just thought it'd be nice to deviate a little bit and discuss what is probably the most anticipated movie of the year. Not really, other than thanks for giving some insight to the movie. I'm looking forward to watching it. I've not really been spoiled, so it's all good. I'm relieved because I really was not trying to reveal any of this stuff to someone who doesn't want. Like I don't care about spoilers. I read the plot on WikiPiss immediately after it was written by somebody, and I still was just as interested in seeing the movie after reading that because I want to see how it would play out. I just know that there are people who really don't like spoilers, so I was trying to make sure you didn't get it revealed for you. But yeah, I'd say the best parts, the performances. I think the story's interesting. The main issues I have with it has too many characters, And I never want to hear anybody say that about Spider-Man 3 again. You got 5 villains where that movie had 3 and you guys were crying. So that needs to be erased as a criticism of that movie. Um, it has a lot of interesting ideas that and characters who don't get enough attention. And it all boils down to it being a very large cast with a lot of different plots that kind of play into a main one that don't get their due time to prosper. But I still say it's very satisfying to someone who likes the Raimi trilogy or prefers that to anything that's come afterward. And it really does have like something there for everybody. And I definitely am going to see this in theaters again because my brother hasn't seen it yet. So you know, that's not exactly a little thing I do of just going to see a movie twice in theaters. Because I mentioned before, I'm not really the biggest fan of sitting up with a bunch of strangers who scream in your ear every 2 seconds. So it was nice. I definitely think I'm probably on a. I don't like doing number ratings, but maybe an 8 out of 10. As I said before, I don't want to give it a 7 because that would mean that the issues I have with it, like I guess, I won't give it a 10 or a 9, but I will say it's probably an 8, and it is something I look forward to seeing again when I eventually do. And that even though I do think the return of Maguire and Garfield isn't as exciting and amazing as people made it out to be, it still is a very welcome thing to see an actor or actors who haven't played the character in the case of Garfield, 7 years, in the case of Maguire, 14 years. Yeah, according to my younger sibling, he said everyone started screaming when Maguire was. Megumi, I actually recorded the reaction. I can't post it on here because YouTube is taking down every single time they hear audio or any like thing from this movie. But yeah, people they screamed when Melina first appeared, when Defoe was in the Green Goblin suit, when Garfield first showed up, and then when Maguire first showed up. And then there's a specific thing that Garfield does that people screamed about later on in the movie. And I said before, I'm not a fan of TASM, like outside of the first one. So seeing Garfield again was kind of like whatever to me. But if they want to do another one with him or whatever, I have no issue with that at all. I'm not against any actor coming back to play a character because I would not want people to be against someone I like coming back to play. So I try to be fair. I just would prefer if they gave him another 2 movies for a trilogy than continuing off of TASM 2 because I think that thing is horrible. But that's besides the point. I still think it would be kind of cool, like the Amazing Spider-Man continues, where it's just ignores the second one, direct sequel to the first one. I don't know, him and Gwen are married or something. Just I would prefer that because that would be a pretty like I wish they would embrace that these actors have aged, that time has passed. I don't get why everything is so like dead set on staying in this really tiny space of time. That's one of the reasons I was really thrilled at the prospect of Maguire playing the character again, seeing an older Spider-Man. We never get that in anything anymore because Marvel has some weird mandate where they have to make this character be a little boy forever. So yeah, that's my review. I liked it. I hope after this we get some of these actors to come back, whether it's in the MCU again or something else like a Raimi Spider-Man 4. I thought it was enjoyable. So thanks for showing up, Megumi, Akatsuki Merchant, these other people. Have a good day.